Hi there, Greg Day, Security CTO for Symantec, and welcome to another video blog. Today I wanted to talk about our recently released State of Information survey. So what was the key headline from this? Well, for me, probably the most important fact we got from this was information is becoming an ever more critical part of everyday business. And what we saw was typically 35% of businesses' total value is now tied into the information that they own and use. So what does all of this actually mean? Well, if information is becoming the increasingly valuable commodity within our business, we're seeing ever more risks and incidents against it. For example, we saw from the survey that 65% of those surveyed had actually had some sort of incident involving important data, and 76% actually had some sort of incident with confidential or critical data. So why is this happening? Well, I think if we look back to the survey, we could see that we are all gathering and using ever-increasing volumes of information. For example, small businesses can have up to 500 plus terabytes of information that they're trying to use and manage, and enterprise businesses having in excess of 100,000 terabytes of information. Add to that, we're trying to use that information in ever more diverse ways, whether that's with our supply chain, with partners, or giving our customers access back to that information. I think the final facet here is we're also becoming increasingly aware of the problem, whether it's from the media coverage or actually things we're seeing within our own organizations. Now, what's significant of this is the impact that it's having on our businesses. Looking back to the survey, we saw that nearly half of those surveyed actually saw loss of customers as a result of that incident. Behind that, brand damage, 36% of organizations actually saw a significant impact on their brand, and I think probably most significant in many ways to all of us was actually the expense that goes with responding to that breach and the actual impact on their revenue. And over a third of those organizations surveyed saw those two different factors. All of this highlights to me that this is a problem that we need to be very clear in understanding today, and now really is the time that we need to focus in on how do we start to tackle the challenge of managing information, keeping it safe and secure. So what do I actually need to do? How do I change my strategy tomorrow to respond to this? Well, I think for many of us, this really feels like the kind of Goliath. With over 2.2 zettabytes of data created and duplicated this year, I think it's tough to know quite how and where to start. So I think the first step for us is to simplify the problem down. A bit like that kind of elephant. How do I take it a bite at a time? So how do I do that? Well, one of the first things is most of us have duplicates of information. So if we can actually look at that and start to deduplicate, move back to less multiple instances of the same data, and typically over a third of our data is duplicates, we reduce the size and scale of the problem. I think the next thing to do is to actually prioritize. Not all information is the same, so we need to look at what's most critical to us and prioritize that. And I think all of us generally can name 2 or 3 or 4 types or bits of information that are critical to our businesses. So that's your starting point. Once we identify those, we need to actually focus in on what's key to that data. How is it being used? Why is it being used? And in many ways, we go through a learning curve. We often have the kind of theoretical view of what we think is happening, but part of the strategy is to actually review that, monitor it, actually figure out, is that really what's going on? Because what we want to do is to enable the business, not to funnel it down into some very constrained processes. So as I go through that learning curve, then I can start to apply those security controls. And just as everything else in security, this has to be dynamic. So we need to continue to monitor and adapt, whether it's then looking at different methods of communicating or sharing that information, or actually then broadening out down into the next levels of information and how we start to monitor and apply the right controls. I think the final part of this is, how do I do this in a cost and time efficient way? And I think we can learn some valuable lessons from the traditional space. we need to look at how do we get better visibility across our broad estate. How do we make use or leverage existing technologies to give us that understanding of our information? And how do we actually start to apply this in an integrated fashion so those different components work together to help enable our business? So I think the summary of this is we've probably spent the last decade or 2 or 3 decades focusing in on protecting the assets, making sure that our infrastructure and our systems are available and functioning. The simple reality is the value of those assets are decreasing, and what we're seeing the significant increase in value of is the information we use. For all of us now, there is the time to step back and look whether we are balancing our security time and investment relative to the information and the assets, and then start to review and revise our strategy to be appropriate to today's risks and challenges. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you on the next blog.